jumping on in, if someone has actually never seen anything that you guys have done before, what is the first thing you want them watching and why?
A really good
That's a
question.
really good question. Wow. I mean, I think, you know, Will and I are sort of strange beasts. We're very cynical, and our comedy tends to be run hard in life and also in the movies we've made. And yet we're also sort of have a tremendous amount of heart. And so we're always looking for kind of that combination, I think, in our work. And I think it sort of has defined a lot of our early stuff. And I think with this movie specifically, it's been interesting because we've now been sort of over-indexing a little bit in the heart department, I think, which was a nice process on this one.
But I think if we had to pick one distinctive piece of work, I think it's a strange one, which is there's a PSA that we developed for Organ Donate, which we kind of wrote about a character that was not redeemable until after his death, when you realized that he was an organ donate.
It was called The World's Biggest Asshole, and he and I think it possessed both of those two qualities.
Yeah, and it's a small piece, and it's an odd one to choose because it doesn't really stand up in terms of length, time, or scope to any of the movies we've done, but it definitely speaks directly to our sensibility, which is what Josh said, which is kind of the darkness and a little bit of the cynicism and the humor with a twist of kind of heart at the end, because ultimately we're kind of softies. So
listen, obviously people want to make movies with you. You had, been able to make a career in Hollywood, which is like winning a lottery. But if you could get the financing to make anything you want, what would you make and why?
Well, this is not just timely. Lyle was a big passion project of ours. It's a book that we've always loved together collectively, and the rights were definitely difficult to get. And we found a great fracture point where they had lapsed, and we were able to come in. So this was an actual dream come true, because we'd also wanted to make a musical forever. So there's definitely, lots of mountains in front of us to climb, but this specifically was something that checked a lot of boxes for us because it was beloved for both of us as a book. And I think, again, the musical component was something really exciting to have done. But I think, what else? I mean, I think what we've been trying to do, which we've been lucky to do, is just expand out of our comfort zone.
And we just did a sci-fi film that's coming out after this with Anthony Ramos for Universal called Distance. So we're starting to kind of get to those projects, I think, that you're describing.
Jumping into with Lyle, obviously you need the lead voice. And I'm just curious, had you been thinking about Shawn? How did it actually land on, Shawn doing the voice? And did anyone else come close to actually landing the role?
Our decision to make the character not speak, which was, a big part of the book, was a hard one because we were really worried defensively that the studio was going to ask us to do that, because it's sort of logical in these kind of movies to, boost the main character with a comedic superstar behind it. So once we got past that hurdle, it was, well, how do we voice him? And I think what we were looking for was someone that really resembled the character and had kind of an innocence and an openness. So we thought about, well, is there a teenage singer that, that should do this role? And I think, we wanted it to be somebody on the young side for sure. And we also wanted it to be kind of a voice that really stopped you in your tracks. And that's actually a very short list when you come down to it. And so there were a lot of those people. I mean, there were 5 names on that list. I'm sure you can imagine who they were, and we actually looked at the list visually. We put it up on the wall and we thought about it, and we were like, what's great about Shawn is he's an innocent, and there's not a lot that you know about him in a way. Do you know what I mean? You know here and there some facts, but there's still a blank slate there. And I think for us, that's what drew him to us really as a first choice, because we felt like we want it not to feel like it comes with a tremendous amount of baggage in that choice. And I think once we started to talk to him, he spoke of his stage fright, his anxiety, his, stepping into the power of his talent and what that struggle was about for him. And that felt very much thematically where Lyle was as a character. And so for us, it all sort of made logical sense and fell into place. And he really surprised us in a way, because we asked him to do a different style of music than he was used to. Justin and Benj are, they have musical roots, and there's a lot of interpretation in that kind of text versus what you might do in a pop song, which is sometimes a little bit more about a vocal line with less interpretation. And a lot of the interpretation comes in the production of a track. And Shawn was actually able to really do that in a raw and really unexpected way. So I think for us, it felt like just a great marriage of, a person bringing their own sensibility to something and kind of what we had hoped the character could emulate. So it was a good match.
Yeah, I was just surprised Chris Pratt didn't get the voice role because, he looks, I'm obviously joking. Listen, making this movie, no matter how much money you had, there's always going to be an obstacle with time, budget. There's always obstacles. So what ended up being the biggest hurdles that you were nervous about while making the film?
Well, I think the biggest hurdles are, that musicals require a completely different way of making than any other movie. You know what I mean? It's a bit of an art form that's gone out of Hollywood. It takes a friend of ours who made a bunch of musicals told us that, you really have to make the movie well in advance of making the movie. And most movies are not set up in that way now. You know what I mean? There's release targets that you're hitting, and we were very lucky. Sony was very eager to get this made and into the theaters, and so a lot of our hurdles had to do with time, in terms of time to rehearse, time to get the songs early enough to really build these big sequences. We were able to do it, but it required a lot of sort of overlapping. We were shooting while we would then go all night and rehearse and then come back to the stages. So it was a tyranny of time, which a lot of movies are, but this one particularly was very hard in that department.
Obviously, Javier is very selective with the roles he takes. You've spoken about the studio didn't think you could get him, and you were able to get him. I'm just curious, what do you end up drinking the night that he says yes? Because it's such a great casting scoop. Do you know what I mean? Like, how I'm making a joke about this, but I can't imagine your reaction when he actually said yes.
We had such a strange way in which we found out, which is that we had talked to him, over several, almost 4 long Zooms, 6 long Zooms. And, ultimately he told us, I need the weekend to decide if I'm absolutely going to do this or not. But, he was nervous about, am I funny enough? Can I do the singing? He had a lot of he's very hard on himself as an actor, and he really wanted to make sure he could deliver. And he was on vacation with his family, and he went off to the beach, and coming out of the water was a small child holding a crocodile inflatable raft. And I think he thought, well, this says I have to do this movie. He grabbed the kid's raft and took a picture of it and sent it to us. So we thought we weren't going to hear until Monday. And then on a Sunday, we got this picture of him standing on a beach holding the raft. We were like, what does this mean? Like, is this yes or no? And so we sort of assumed it meant yes and went out and got drunk. I think I had tequila. But
I totally believe everything I saw in the movie about a crocodile being able to sing. I believed everything. The only thing that I really was like, I don't think this is true, is seeing everyone drive around New York City without traffic. Like, that was my one thing in the sand where I'm like, this is too far. I'm making a joke, obviously, but
no, you're not wrong, but inversely, closing Fifth Avenue was like a feat. And when it happened, we were like, let's just keep the glory of it, because it's all everyone wants to believe is that you can move around that city easily. But it's a funny thing that you mention it, because it was definitely a stop and go situation. You get very limited. We wanted to shoot in New York because it's, the book is set in New York City. And we didn't really want to double those streets, but that is not an easy thing to do.
No, that's my only objection to the film. Everything else, great. Just the lack of traffic is where I draw the line.
We're trying to sell an idealized New York here.
Yeah.
But by the way, it totally works with the idealized New York. I'm totally teasing you guys. So I've I've been a huge fan of Scoot for a long time. And he doesn't really get to do roles like this, you know.
Never.
Was that one of the reasons why you wanted to put him in the movie?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. We've known Scoot for, well over a decade or more.
He was kind of a commercial ringer. Right.
What we mean by that is, so we started in commercials before we did, our features, and there were always these commercials that you needed to get an actor who could just make it work. And there were like 5 or 6 of them that were always, they would come in and they would just crush it. And believe it or not, Scoot was one of those guys.
And it was in the comedy space.
Yeah, he was very, very funny. So we knew him before he became this big dramatic actor as a very funny actor. So when we told the studio, they were like, really, Scoot? I mean, he's like such a respected drama actor. We're like, no, he's very funny. And then
it was a joy to watch him get to do that. And also, he was really excited because as a first, he got to show his kids something he actually did, because most of his stuff is, on the margin. So
talk a little bit about maybe some of the bigger debates you and the studio had. What were they over, and how did you end up solving those, debates?
Strangely, this is going to sound like, we're not sharing the, how the sausage is made or whatever, but it's, strangely, the studio was very in sync about all the major things in the movie. And some of that, comes down to just luck. Like everybody agreed Javier Bardem would be the perfect person for the role. So when you get Javier Bardem, everybody's like, oh, great. Everybody agreed Pasek and Paul are the perfect composers for it. So you go, great. It's when you kind of don't get those first choices that the riffs kind of, so the fault lines kind of show. I think for us, the thing we were most afraid of was that they were going to make us make the character talk, because that was going to take it tonally in a different direction, where he would be a wisecracking kind of crocodile, as Will said, driven by a comedic actor. And they kind of got that was important to the tone of the movie, and that he only expresses himself through song. So we sort of were able to largely avoid, I think, all of the big contentious things for us. You know what I mean? Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there was a question about, while we were shooting, can you please use Crocodile Rock? And it was like that thing that, it's like when something very clear is presented, you sometimes resist it. And we were like, well, no, that's just too on the nose. It's too obvious. And it kept coming up from other people, oddly, like the actors were like, oh, the Elton John song, Crocodile Rock. We were like, yeah, they're like, you should use that in the movie. We're like, all right, if you hear that enough, you should probably listen. So we had a little snippet at the end of the movie where Shawn sings it.
And of course, the audience loved it. And we looked at each other and we were like, yeah, we'll claim credit for that.
Exactly.
Well, that's one of the things. Listen, I love talking about the editing process, because that's where it all comes together. So talk a little bit about what you learned from that first test screening or early friends and family screenings that actually impacted the finished film.
I think, we learned a lot about the pace and energy that comes when you have a musical. It's a very strong flavor, and an audience, once you give them a taste of that, they want more. And, we kept sort of reducing our space between the musical numbers in order to do that. But the film, it's pretty close to what we shot. We only, I think, cut 2 scenes out of the movie, but it was in the areas where we felt like, okay, it's time to get this crocodile singing again, because it's been a minute. And, we only had 2 test screenings. They both did very well. But the thing that's crazy is, I mean, that we've done mostly R-rated comedies, right? So what you're normally getting is very sort of cynical, people in their 20s standing in line, waiting to rip you apart, or in the best case scenario, just go hysterical at any of the vignettes that you do. And the thing that was hilarious is you get there and there's just like throngs of kids. Do you know what I mean?
We're like, oh man.
We're like, this is a whole new thing.
Like people gonna
yeah,
say?
like what is the mind of a 6-year-old with a popcorn the size of their head going to say about what our choices are on color palette? Do you know what I mean? Like it was a strange thing to
it's like a truth bomb.
Yeah,
just
to
like
test a movie at 11 o'clock in the morning, with like a row of juice boxes was just a brand new experience for us. And it was bizarre. It was like very strange. It's like
it's the moment you realize, oh, this was the audience that we're making.
Yeah, exactly. And you learn, I mean, a kid audience is, I mean, there's no hiding. They're not being polite, they're not quiet, and like what normally happens in a test audience where everyone claps and laughs and then rip you apart on carbs. These kids let you know in the moment if they're there or not.
I actually was happy that my theater was filled with kids yesterday, because you can feel if they're enjoying it because or not, because they'll start talking, or they want to go to the bathroom, or you know what I mean? Like or
your worst fear, they like cry and walk out.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, I can't imagine what it's like for you guys for directors watching that test screening for the first time, just knowing that it's all come down to.
It's funny, it's really, really hard, but it's also like over the years, it's completely invaluable. It's a weird part of the process that, especially if you're making comedies, or especially if we're just plugging in our especially if you're making comedies, or especially if you're making, something that requires the constant sort of input of the audience, musicals being the same thing, you kind of really need to feel it in front of a big audience, because otherwise you're going off your own internal rhythm, which can fail you after you've seen it 40 or 50 times.
Yeah, I've spoken to a lot of directors who talk about how, when you've been in the editing room for 6 months with something, you no longer find it funny and you want to take it out of the movie, and you need to be reminded, no, the sequence worked for a reason, don't fuck with it.
Yeah, you really start to cannibalize your own babies after a couple months.
I mean, I'm sure from speaking to directors, but having been through so many test screenings over the years, especially with comedies, we have such thick skins, you know what I mean? Like by now, when we were doing Lyle, I mean, again, the new twists were kids. But we've had some tough test screenings in the past, you know what I mean? Like, meaning in terms of your anxiety and your buildup and what's going to be funny and what's not. And, so.
But you always come out with a clearer sense of the movie.
100%.
What do you think would surprise soon-to-be fans of the film about the actual making of the movie, if anything?
Well, I think how little we cheated with Javier Bardem, meaning he rehearsed for almost 5 months and demanded, when he showed up on set, to do the numbers from start to finish, because he was so proud that he had worked as hard as he had, and he really did not want us to ever bring on a double or to have any other part of his work not be him. So I think you would look at it and go, oh, that's Javier Bardem. There's no way he did all of that. He really did all of it. It was incredible.
This goes back to what I was saying. When Javier commits to a role, he commits to a role, which is why I think the studio was like, you're never getting him.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we were incredibly lucky, and he works incredibly hard. And as Josh said, we had dance doubles and voice doubles, and we were ready to auto-tune him, and we used none of those things or people. They just sat on the sidelines waiting.
Yeah, I need someone to auto-tune me on a daily basis. I appreciate if you could hook me up.
I feel this same
I
way.
think the other kind of amazing thing with Javier was he is such an actor first, before a sort of whatever celebrity, whatever he is, that he doesn't leave set. So literally, he would not go back to his trailer. He would sit in a chair and read through his script, and to the point where sometimes the crew would be like, "It's freaking me out. Like, I can't set my shot." And he would often jump up and be like, "Oh, I'll stand in." So he would literally there to he did almost everything but carry the equipment. It was incredible.
Yeah, that's I love hearing stories like that. Just people that are that professional and want to be there. There's a few other actors I've spoken to that like being on set in between. They don't want to go back to their trailer at all.
No, it's a weird one, because it's amazing, but it can be uncomfortable, in a weird way.
We're so used to just being free to do our work.
Well, there's often that thing that happens, which is they command a lot of energy and eyes, and what happens is when an actor like that's on set, everybody's sort of on their best, everybody's tense and on their best behavior, no matter how relaxed the actor is. And then usually the actor leaves, and everyone kind of takes a breath, and then starts to go check their cell phones or, has their small talk or, eats with their mouth open from craft service or whatever it is. And sometimes like when an actor stands on set, it's just that thing that it keeps
What
everybody
I found
sort of.
was, what's interesting was is after people got over that and got used to it, was he was around listening to problems. And I think he does it so that he can help people solve their problems. So he'd be like, I can walk over to this light if you need me
Yeah.
to be, it wasn't, there was no sort of membrane between what he,
No,
what he could do and what we
he
needed.
was one of the
So,
best ones. Yeah.
So before I run out of time with you guys, I have some other questions. You mentioned Distant already, which is coming out next year, which is a completely different film for the two of you. What can you tease people about it?
It was a very contained story. That's what we were excited about. It's really just one man against the elements. And then there's a twist where he finds another survivor, and it's Anthony Ramos and Naomi Scott, and they're both fantastic. And I think what's fun about it is it really sort of takes Anthony in a different direction, because it's very, it has a very dramatic core because of the set of circumstance, but there's some humor, so it gives a range for this actor that you haven't seen, and he really delivered.
He's fantastic in it. It's really a sort of, we joke, it's a survival horror romantic comedy.
Right. A lot of things at once.
When do you think, because I believe, and I could be wrong, it comes out early next year?
Yeah, it's supposed to be
January, end of January,
beginning of
So
February.
when do you think the marketing will start, where we'll see a poster and a trailer and everything else?
We're already starting to look at posters and trailers, so I think it's going to start gearing up soon.
Yeah.
How much are you debating, or how much are you working with the studio in terms of how much you want to show in the marketing versus, keeping those surprises under wraps? Because the thing that people don't realize is that, like, most people, not like the average person, goes to the movies like 2 times a year. So a lot of the marketing is always geared towards those rare people that don't go that often. But, for people that do go all the time and watch a trailer, they don't want everything ruined. It's that delicate balance.
It's a very astute point, and it's something we always struggle with, no matter how great the marketing department, is at whatever studio we're at, which is, we always believe that less is more, like you said, because we're crazy moviegoers, and that's the kind of stuff we like. What's interesting that we've been told, and we resisted it often, especially with comedies, is that there's a recognition factor that's just true and factual, where a lot of people see something, and if they like it, they like to see it again in the movie and be reminded of it from the materials.
So oddly, jokes that appear in trailers play better in the test screenings you do immediately afterwards, because the audience, we always were like, you're ruining it, you're giving it
why
away.
are you giving this joke away?
And then you'll see, like, wow, well, you can tell they recognize that joke. So it's always a weird balance. It's like, you want to, as cinephiles ourselves, you want to have that perfect trailer that just teases without, giving away the whole beginning, middle, and end of the thing.
But we love to tease out stuff, like and we rarely get to do it, as you said correctly. On Office Christmas Party, we did a teaser trailer that was just a voiceover that we wrote for Jason Bateman to do over some images, and that was it. And it did very well.
Still one of our favorites.
Still one of our favorites, but you rarely get that opportunity. Usually, it's expensive to market a movie. I'm sure you know that, and it's more expensive now than it ever has been. And so
there's always this urge to try to sell everything you've got in that,
and give as much information as you can have. And I think, there are a few anticipatory sort of well-known IP that you can play with, whether it be Spider-Man or Ghostbusters, where you can have just a moment, a logo, a familiar character that an audience will lean into because they are so excited at the tease. Normally a lot of those characters that you're sitting in front of behind you, do you know what I mean, can do that. But when you're doing something that people don't know that much about, they need to unfortunately be told a lot more. So it's a tricky art, and it's a hard one to get right.
I read that you guys might be doing Oregon Trail. Is that like true? What's the deal with this?
Well, it's, this was born of wanting to work with Pasek and Paul again, who did the music for this.
And they've both been very obsessed with Oregon Trail. And, we were talking about what we could cook up next because we really want to do another musical. And they mentioned that, and we now have the rights to it, and we're putting it together alongside them and some other exciting
For us,
people.
that's sort of returning a little bit to our roots in comedy, marrying it with the fun of doing a big musical, and also just the ambition of kind of taking that very seriously as well, and making a big historical westward expansion epic that's also about dying from dysentery.
I mean, for people that don't realize, this is a iconic video game that, I mean, like well, let's just say it's an early one of the earliest video games.
Yeah, it was the only video game you were, quote, allowed to play in school because it was educational. So everybody would like spend their free period in whatever science computer lab, like basically playing this early video game.
But
And
it's right up there with like Snake and Tetris in terms of really complicated IP. I mean, it's not, it's an early, very early sort of lo-fi
role-playing kind of type game, and it always had this dark band of humor running through it, because your chances of dying from everything from dysentery to a cut to anything was like basically every move you ended up dying. So that was just death.
It does seem like it could be ripe for comedy in terms of you have this huge group going west, and then literally every 5 minutes someone gets a cut and they're just dead.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. Or it was the period where you had to have 9 kids because, only 2 of them would survive.
So can I ask, where are you in the development process of the project?
Yeah, we're putting it together right now with a writer, and then looking to partner with
A studio.
Yeah.
Oh, so you guys like literally have the rights and are putting it together?
Yes, with the partners of the original publishers.
Yeah, we're bringing it to people.
And we want to find a home for it where we know it'll get made in the right way. So that was a little bit what we did on this project, which was really got the rights, developed, and then found our studio partner. We're finding that to be a really kind of effective, creative approach.
Yeah, that's I can see how that would be, because you also, that way it doesn't get stuck in development hell. It's like, okay, we have all this, here's the budget we need, this is what we want to do you want to finance it?
Yeah, and I think they know what they're buying too, so it's good for them because they're not being duped. They kind of know, okay, this is the movie we're going to make. So
do you envision this as like a PG-13 like fun kind of movie, or because you can play it 2 different ways?
I think there's been a discussion about R-rated. I think it's interesting. I think we want to find its tone to be funny and not sort of pull any punches, and be able to be darkly funny, but we also want it to be, accessible enough for a big audience. So I think we're just trying to answer that question now.
Yeah. Also, I think it's great that Justin and Benj are going to do the music, which is, obviously you must have had a great time working together on Lyle.
We did. I mean, they're incredible. I mean, there's nothing shy of that. I mean, they are creating something, that has been lost for a long time, which is, original.
Popular. I mean, there's a few people of which they are, right up there, creating popular music for movies, and not just writing for Broadway and that being adapted, but they actually are creating new musical, towering works of musical theater for the film. So that's just incredible to watch.
Yeah.
My last thing on this, I can't imagine it's easy to get the rights to something that was created in the 70s. How does that actually work?
Are you talking about for Oregon Trail? Or are you talking about for Lyle Crocodile?
Oh no, for Oregon Trail, because that's like, a few people. Anyway, what is that like?
Well, it's owned by a publishing company, and we had to do what we often have to do, and what we had to do for Lyle, which is to give them a sense of, on multiple phone calls and Zooms, of what our intentions are and how exploitive we want to be and how truthful we want to be to the original material and what it's going to look and feel like. And, all people are very protective of their IP, as they should be. And, these guys have so far been great partners in allowing us to take it and run with it. And also we made them producing partners, basically. So the publishers are now our partners.
And we'll be involved with make sure that it's done right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I can, that's the smart move. That makes sense. Listen, I'm just going to say, congrats on everything.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.